way. Your job's a joke, you broke, your love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear. When it hasn't been your day, or maybe your month, or even your year. But I'll be there for you.
Que pedo, way. Welcome back to Mr. D's class. We are still talking about post-revolutionary Mexico, and today's lecture is about the return of Obregon. He's back, as predicted, sort of, by De La Huerta. So, after Obregon's term, and this is last class, he backed a man named Plutarco Calles instead of De La Huerta, and he backed Calles because De La Huerta really screwed up with that Bucareli Treaty in the eyes of Obregon. He made it too pro-American. It was too great for America. So De La Huerta tried yet again for another revolution. He even called his own little Plan de Veracruz, but unfortunately for De La Huerta, he was easily defeated. Obregon had American weaponry, and most of the labor and military supported Obregon over De La Huerta. So, poor guy, he had to leave. Now, remember, Obregon backed Plutarco Calles, and Plutarco Calles' presidency, well, you know, you can look at it in two ways. For one, it was very positive for the working class in that he established the official 8-hour workday the Constitution had asked for. But it was pretty horrible for the Catholic Church, and remember that 90% of Mexicans are Catholic, so this is a pretty big deal, not just for Mexico, but for the world. It eventually led to a huge religious rebellion called the Cristero Rebellion, which almost took Obregon's life, and it was definitely a public relations disaster. One big horrible part was the public execution of a priest on faulty evidence. The world was aghast, and eventually even the United States had to intervene and see if they could do anything to improve the situation. So let's talk about Serrano's revolt. First, let me pause so you can copy this large slide down. All right, so I mean, De La Huerta was kind of right, I guess. At the end of Calles' term, Obregon, since he had a lot of political, clout at this time in Congress, he used his influence to amend the Constitution to allow for non-consecutive terms, which meant basically that he could run again. So a three-way race ensued, and it was between Obregon, Francisco Serrano, who was one of his generals, and a man named Arnulfo Gomez. Now, this got pretty bloody, as you could imagine. This is Mexico, after all. So, Francisco Serrano tried to stage a revolt after Obregon amended the Constitution because he was so upset that he was already, going in the same line as all of his predecessors. But, unfortunate for Serrano, 3/4 of the army stayed loyal to both Calles and Obregon, so Calles executed him. All right, and then for no reason they just gunned down Arnulfo Gomez. So a three-way election turned back to a one-man show once again. So in 1928, July 17th, Obregon was elected. He was re-elected. So I mean, there goes that constitutional provision. And get this, he's celebrating with his family. He's having dinner. There's a sketch artist walking around, kind of drawing every single person to the table. And as soon as he got to Obregon, León Toral, the sketch artist, pulls out a gun and shoots Obregon in the face. Now, Toral was eventually captured and tortured, and he revealed that he was one of those cristeros, which is why we had to learn about that debacle in the first place. But the truth is, many Mexicans, and this is in its true novela fashion, were suspecting that actually Calles was behind the murder, that evil spider. So, some photos. Here we can see Serrano, the man who tried to stage a revolt since Obregon was violating the Constitution, and he died. And then they killed Arnulfo Gomez. There you can see him being publicly executed just for trying to go against Obregon. So, not a great time to be running for president in this time. Now, here we can see the dining room where they were celebrating that victory for Obregon in that three-way race. He was eventually killed, though, by León Toral. And here we can see one more cartoon showing the death by the caricature artist and the publication, El Señor General Álvaro Obregón is dead. So, Obregón is now killed. And as I told you guys at the start of this, it's a freaking soap opera. Everybody dies.
In 1928, Calles' term ends. Álvaro Obregón is re-elected to the presidency. But before his inauguration takes place, at a banquet held in his honor, Obregón is murdered. The violence on the battlefield may have ended in 1920, but not the bloodshed. In less than a decade, Presidents Carranza and Obregón are assassinated, as well as revolutionary generals Villa and Zapata. The presidency is in limbo. Calles wants to step in, but by law, he cannot serve another consecutive term as president. So he engineers the rise to power of a series of puppet presidents.
Between 1928 and 1934, what you have is the maximato, a process in which Calles puts together a political coalition that would remain loyal to Calles and his control over the politics of Mexico.
All right, next slide. I'll pause so you can copy this down. All right, so remember that Calles, people were thinking that Calles was responsible for Obregon's death. He then had a stroke of genius. All right, guys? He announced that he would not seek another term as the president. And this kind of ended suspicions, because if you killed Obregon, isn't your goal to be president, Calles? And he then told Congress to elect, another governor of one of the states, Emilio Gil, who was, we don't have to talk about him. Unfortunately for Emilio, he became president in the 1930s, and if you know your history, that's when the Great Depression goes full swing in late 1920s, 1930s. So basically, he inherited a horrible Mexican economy, although he did mediate the end of the church strike that had been going on for those 3 years. Now, this is the true genius of what Calles did. He had taken a page from Luis Morones. If you remember, that's the guy who created CROM, that huge 2 million member union that was at this point kind of bloated and just favoring management over the workers. And he thinks to himself, what would be a way that I could evade this weird constitutional ban on being the president? I'll create a political party. So he created the Partido Nacional Revolucionario, which stands for the National Revolutionary Party. And from that point forward, he'd be putting forward candidates that were basically loyal to him. All right? This party would tie together many different interest groups and social classes, and it was his key. And eventually we would call him El Jefe Maximato, El Jefe Calles, the real boss behind the scenes with his political party. So here we can see a cartoon of Emilio Gil. He was the president after Obregón had died. He really did nothing else. What was really happening, though, was that geniusly Calles was creating a political party called the PNR. This is a pretty big deal because the PNR and its offshoots, eventually the PRI, will be in power until the 2000s. Okay, they will be in power for the next 70 years. Now that is a one-party country. Okay, let me show you this video on El Maximato. This is the man behind the PNR.
A process in which Calles puts together a political coalition that would remain loyal to Calles and his control over the politics of Mexico. Calles was known as the Jefe Máximo, the supreme chief. By 1934, the full impact of the World Depression has hit Mexico. There is increasing discontent. It is palpable. People can feel it. People can see it.
Tens of thousands of Mexican workers who had left Mexico in the preceding 20 years to work in the US make their way back to Mexico. They're unemployed. They exacerbate the crisis already being experienced in Mexico.
The Maximato presidents, still under the control of ex-President Calles, resist any significant land or labor reform. Now, with the Depression, unemployment skyrockets. Another storm looms on the horizon.
So this political cabal realizes that there has to be some degree of recognition of this growing restiveness and discontent and anger over what is taking place in Mexico, given the impact of the Depression.
So the stage is being set in 1932, 33, and 34 for the arrival of a brand new and very importantly different phase in the history of the Mexican Revolution, the period of Lázaro Cárdenas.
Calles thought, here's a military leader who has always been very loyal to me. He thought of as a kind of moderate who, when he was governor of Michoacán, had helped peasants but had not been a radical. And Cárdenas became the candidate of the PNR, the Partido Nacional Revolucionario.
Mi padre fue a hablar con el general Calles, a quien consideraba, por otro lado, su jefe político. Y entre las muchas cosas que le trató, le dijo que quería primero su autorización para presentar su candidatura. El general Calles lo escuchó y le dijo que no se preocupara, que él podía con toda confianza aceptar la candidatura.
Pretty crazy, huh? Can you imagine that he figured this out? Basically, who cares if you're president? If you're the leader of the most popular political party, you are the de facto president. All right, let's pause so you can copy this down, the next series of presidents. All right, so let's talk about two presidents that were put forward by Calles, okay? Remember that in 1930, that was the next election, and in this election, the PNR put forward a man named Ortiz Rubio. You can see his image right there. And he went against a name you've heard before, Jose Vasconcelos. Remember, this was the Minister of Education under Obregon. This is the guy that made the first series of schools, and he paid for the muralist movement, and he created all those libraries. So Rubio eventually won that election, but one of the supporters of Vasconcelos shot, I mean in pure Mexican fashion at this point, shot but did not kill Rubio. As a result, hundreds of Vasconcelos supporters were gathered and hung, and Vasconcelos had to leave the country. He was exiled to America. He knew that his life was in danger. So let's talk about Rubio's. That was a rough start for Ortiz Rubio, but let's talk about his 2 years as president. This was a really, really, really unfortunate dude. Basically, you know, the Depression meant that there was no demand for Mexican products or manufactured goods or anything. Unemployment was high. Now here's the thing, here's the tricky thing. Because unemployment was high, people were unhappy. So they kept, in their local elections, voting against the people that were currently in power. Well, guess who was the person that was orchestrating who would be replaced, who would be the next person in charge? You're right, Calles. So slowly but surely, Calles was able to, using his political clout, take over the entire legislature of Mexico. And he ran the show so much that after 2 years, Rubio's own cabinet wouldn't even listen to what he said. They would talk strictly to Plutarco Calles and wait for his approval before doing anything. He got so fed up that he eventually resigned. He said, "Why am I even here? You're pretty much the president." So Calles replaced him with the next president, President Abelardo Rodriguez, who, you know, took a page and learned his lessons from those first 2 years. And he warned his cabinet. You guys remember, a cabinet is basically the presidentials, like the helpers, you know, the people that he's charging with leading the country. He said, only take issues to Calles if I approve of it. This is what Abelardo Rodriguez said. And because he was a bit more cautious than the previous president, he got plenty more done. For example, he was able to get a minimum wage in, and he set up a series of important departments that could handle now redistributing land with the agriculture department and helping with the strikes that were going on. He oftentimes sided with the strikers instead of management, and he increased many more paid holidays that would exist in Mexico. So, you know, he did a bit of good, Abelardo, way better than Rubio, that's for sure. So here I can show you one more time. Rubio, remember that he was shot but not killed by one of Vasconcelos' supporters, so Vasconcelos had to leave. Here we can see him taking the reins. But remember, who is really in charge? El maximato. Calles is truly the guy that's in charge. So Ortiz's presidency really didn't matter much. He didn't do anything, and eventually he was overtaken. And then the next president, who was less of a puppet compared to Ortiz, was Abelardo, and he set up minimum wage, paid holidays, he gave plenty of land to the people. And you guys have been waiting for this day. Now, mind you, I know this isn't Spanish, so you're probably not going to understand much of it, but for those of you that live in Miami and have learned Spanish, I give you this gift, a Mexican video you will understand, a comical history of the revolution so far, finishing off with, as you can see here, Plutarco Calles. So enjoy, and we'll finish with that.
Ok, había una vez un país muy grande, y en él había una silla muy muy grande, y desde ahí gobernaba un hombre muy muy grande, llamado Porfirio Díaz, y Porfirio había sido presidente como por siglos, y la gente decía, ¡Ey, muévete! ¡No! Así que este chaparrito Madero escribió un libro diciendo lo increíble que sería que él fuera presidente, y la gente dijo, ok, nos levantamos en armas a las 3, 1, 2, 3, ¡boom! Y tomaron la ciudad en la frontera más lejana de la capital, y Díaz dijo, ¡me largo! Y entonces Madero se volvió presidente, y no hizo nada más. Así que muchos grupos se levantaron en su contra. ¡Tierras, tierras, tierras, tierras! Y Madero dijo, necesito un general confiable para defenderme. Él. Así que el general siniestro lo traiciona y con la ayuda de Estados Unidos dice, ¡soy el presidente! No, no eres. Sí, sí soy. No, no eres. Sí, sí soy. Mira, no eres. Así que Carranza desconoce a Huerta y se aliaron con él Villa y Zapata y todos. Y parecía que todos estaban felices, pero luego no se pusieron de acuerdo en quién debía tomar la silla. Así que se reunieron en Aguascalientes y seguían sin ponerse de acuerdo. Y Carranza dijo, al diablo, escribí una constitución que dice que soy el presidente. ¿Todos a favor? Sí. Y Zapata seguía, tierras, tierras, tierras. Así que lo traicionaron y lo mataron. Y Villa dijo, ya me aburrí. Y después el general de Carranza, Álvaro Obregón, dijo, yo también quiero ser presidente. Y Carranza dijo, no, no puedes. Así que Obregón escribe el plan de Agua Prieta, que básicamente dice, te voy a matar. Así que mataron a Carranza. Y Obregón se volvió presidente y le quitó los derechos a la iglesia, impulsó la cultura y las artes, se creó la UNAM y le regaló la mitad del país a los gringos. Y después tuvo que nombrar un sucesor y dijo, ¡calles! Y los demás dijeron, no, él no nos cae bien. Así que los mataron a todos. Y Villa dijo, a mí me cae mejor Adolfito. Y entonces Calles fue presidente y Obregón volvió a su rancho para fumigar a los indios yaquis. Y Calles estaba con la guerra cristera, que nadie entendía en aquel entonces y nadie entiende ahora. Pero Obregón se aburrió y dijo, ¡quiero la silla otra vez! Así que cambiaron la constitución, lo nombraron presidente, organizaron una comida en su honor y contrataron un caricaturista asesino para amenizar. Y todos dijeron, ¡fue un fanático religioso! Y ahora Calles iba a quedarse con la silla, pero notó un patrón en ella. Así que en vez de eso, puso a otros en su lugar y se mantuvo al mando, y vistió a los charros de burócratas, creó el PRI, y nació la era de las instituciones, e hizo de todos los revolucionarios muertos los mártires y los símbolos de esta nueva era. Y enterró todos sus restos juntos para que se pelearan por las noches. Y 100 años después, con el país azotado por la violencia y la mitad de él inundado, los gobernantes pensaron, ¿saben qué necesita este país de verdad? Una alberca gigante en Reforma y un bigotón luminoso. ¿Todos a favor? ¡Sí! Así que les dieron 800 millones de millones. Y todos fueron felices para siempre.